Hi, guys. So I have a great friend of mine here today. Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Catherine Shah. I'm a rising sophomore from Washington and Leeds University. I'm planning to major in strategic communications and double minor in Chinese as well as digital culture and information. I'm from Gilbert, Arizona, and I think that's pretty much it.
Nice. Oh my gosh, an Arizona gal. I wish. It's like Alabama weather hasn't really fully decided whether it wants to be like fully hot and humid or like cool and humid. So I kind of just wish I could get that like dry desert heat right about now.
It's been desert heat for like months now, which is why I haven't been outside. Not just because of the pandemic, but because it's honestly too hot to be outside. It's already 100 something, and it's like, why would I go outside when it's air conditioned inside?
I feel that.
And
It doesn't
also,
hit
when you can
100s
only do
yet.
patio seating, you're like, please.
Oof. Hundreds? That doesn't even like hit yet for Alabama until like late June, early July. That's when it starts to get to like 100, But I'm guessing like it's probably like already getting to like 110s in Arizona. I couldn't do
Hmm. We love it.
it. Okay, so time for our hot seats questions, just so that everybody else can get to know you as well as I know you. Our first question is, if you could drop everything right now and Corona is not a thing, definitely had to make that point. Where would you go and why?
Ooh, where would I go and why? Um, Maybe to Japan? That's one of the few, I guess, like big name Asian countries that I haven't gone to. Yeah, I would say Japan.
Yes, that would be such a fun trip, especially if you caught like the cherry blossoms too. That would be
Hmm.
so pretty. Mm. Okay. Our second question is, what is your favorite book?
Oh gosh. I'm looking at my bookshelf. Um, my favorite book. That's really difficult. There's so many genres. Okay, I'm gonna name a couple because I'm gonna cop out this question. So, okay, there's a sort of illustrated book. It's called Everyone's an Alien If You're an Alien Too by Johnny Sun, and I really, really love that book. Um, I would grab it. Do you mind if I grab it? I'll just show it to you.
Sure.
Okay, it's this.
Ooh, I haven't heard of
And
this book before.
it's really cute, and I think I knew him first through Twitter, actually, but it's one of the few that I think is just like so very like inspirational in just like its own very kind way. Where it's like the other one, I mean, I really like this book. It's Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. And I think it's just because of the writing style. Like, if you have a very good writing style or a very, like, I guess, unique one, I'm more attracted to it. So, like, Lemony Snicket, like, a series of unfortunate events, like, that one was always, like, been such a cool series for me because just of how it's written. Um, this one was also a really good book. I'll give you the sun. Super cute. I'm just like also there is I believe it's also a queer novel, so we love that representation. Um, Fantasy novels are really great. I enjoy those dystopian novels. I also am I think, a few people that enjoy like what we consider classics, like what you were assigned to read in school reading. There are very few school readings that I did not enjoy, but like I think everyone can agree, like Fahrenheit 451, The Great Gatsby, like 1984, those were just like really good books to read. And I'm someone who likes All Quiet on the Western Front, so I also am just like, I think it's really hard to say a favorite book, because there's books that I read a ton for nostalgic reasons, like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but J.K. Rowling has gotten herself in multiple messes that we don't care for. So
I feel like every like few months, J.K. Rowling just like tweets out something that I would say that she knows, but like she clearly doesn't. She can't help herself. She always tweets out something that gets herself in trouble, and you're just kind of like, sis, take your Twitter away. You should not be in charge of this anymore. You cannot handle this responsibility.
it's strange because the first few reasons why I didn't like J.K. Rowling was because she clearly had opinions on how other people had interpreted her work. Because I remember her being upset that like young girls liked Draco Malfoy. And she was like, girls shouldn't be liking Draco Malfoy. He's such a bad character. And it's like, right, but weren't you the one who wrote that everyone has good dark and light in them? So we're just trying to see him as a balanced character, and if we empathize, I guess that's not our fault. But she was because especially with like the whole thing of like people shipping like Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger, then she's always doing the thing where she's trying to make her series continually be relevant by adding information that wasn't shown in the novel, because Harry doesn't see these things. And you're like, oh, Dumbledore's gay, and we're like, oh, okay, I guess that's nice. What? When did this happen? Where? And then she's like, it was always there. I obviously, but yeah, this is, and so it's always been like a weird relationship between like the community or the fandom and then the author, because honestly, when you enter the Harry Potter fandom / community, like it's great, it's fun to be in. They have a ton of their own headcanons, and there's never really any disrespect, but it always seems like she feels like so offended by everyone's interpretation of her work if it's not what she thought it was, or if she changes it so that it's more progressive and doesn't seem like she's so white and narrow-minded. It's always a very strange author that I'm like, you're going to be relevant. This series is still relevant. You don't have to make it relevant. And every time she tries to make it relevant, she does it wrong. Like this.
No, I agree. I remember like when I first got onto Twitter, she had made those tweets about Malfoy, and I was just thinking to myself, sis, that does not change my opinion at all. Malfoy was still my favorite character. Well, not my favorite, but one of my favorite characters who I shipped with myself back in the day. So like, I hear you, but like pipe down a tiny bit. Pipe down, let the girls have what they want, because Malfoy was that character who, especially when you saw in the movies how terrible his parents were, you were just like, I feel so much
Right?
sympathy for him. He has a heart down there. And for her to like just like crush all of us and be like, no, he was just terrible. He was just an evil person. No,
Yes. And
no.
I also felt like some sort of connection, because I was like, he and I have the same birthday, but basically everything you say about him is what you're saying about me. That's how I took it as like a whatever teenager at the time. I was like, no, how dare you say that? He's raised in an abusive home. He's like, and that's why when I read fan fiction, it's always like redeemed Draco Malfoy. Like he learned the errors of his way through like education and like whatnot, and trying to get himself out of the system. I'm like, yes, we love to see the character growth that you refuse to give him.
That, man. And I feel like you mentioned something like really important about her too, which is kind of like getting into some things that we have been also kind of like seeing people trying to avoid, which is like performative like allyship, constantly changing stuff just to make it seem like, oh my gosh, look at how great of an ally I am. By the way, I am so woke. And you're just kind of like, it doesn't take all that. I just, okay, I guess it's great, but also you're trying really hard to like get us on your side, and it makes you kind of wonder, why do you want us on your side like that? I don't know. It's an interesting thing with J.K. Rowling. Okay, so our last hot seat question is a little bit of a weird one, but I came up with it last night. So, would you rather go without internet for a month? And when I say internet, I also mean like data. You're just not allowed to like access anything online. Or without eating for a week. And then whichever one you choose, why did you choose that one over the other?
Um, okay. I'm someone who likes to find loopholes in these questions, but I'm gonna say eating. I'm gonna go without eating for a week because what's more important is that I'm drinking. And if I can get nutrients through that, like a smoothie or something, because it's sort of an undeniable fact that we are in like an internet age. And I I honestly don't buy the bull crap of like being disconnected from the internet. Like, oh, it's so good to, because maybe it's just like because I was raised in this generation, but I never want to not be informed on things. And like, I see the internet has it has its pros and cons, and I'm always grateful for the pros more than I am for the cons that it has, because it's just without a month. Like it's like for a month without internet, that's long. I don't know how I did it when I was like 7, but it's just hard to, especially when we are like college students, and so much of what our communication, especially with like the pandemic, communicating is all through the internet, whether it's by email or LTE or data or something like that. Social media has also been such a big part of our generation that it's so interconnected that it would honestly be easier to not, or to, I guess, like think of it in terms of like fasting for a week. So yeah, probably that.
No, I agree with you. I know like one of the faculty at our school, he mentioned how for him, he doesn't have a smartphone, but with each coming year, it's like it's harder and harder to not have a smartphone, and how he feels like maybe in the next 5 years, he's almost going to have a smartphone in order to like still stay connected, given all the things that like you can't do on like a typical like normal cell phone, normal like flip phone type cell phone, obviously. So I think that's just really, really interesting how much our society has grown quite used and acquainted to being online. And I feel like the pandemic has only accelerated that.
For sure. Everything like entertainment is online, whether you're getting it streamed to your devices or you're watching it online, be it like YouTube or Twitch. Like social media is online, so look now the way we communicate and everything, and because you have this super smart like little cell phone, now it's like impossible. Like it's like, okay, we call with people on this, you text with people on this, you can play games, you can watch things, you can keep track of your notes, email. They just, I honestly would not want to go back to the days where I didn't have the smartphone. because this just takes a whole lot burden off of my shoulders that I don't have to remember all of this.
No, I agree with that. Plus, it's like it's so nice to a certain extent, at least, to have like a lot of information at your fingertips. So it's like you're not really at the basically you don't have to just wait for a class to teach you things that you can just Google, or even like for a book to be published. For just a simple Google search, you can look at history.com and be able to educate yourself. And that's so different than having to like go through an encyclopedia. My dad was telling me about how his parents bought him a set of encyclopedias for like Christmas for the entire family or something like that. It's just like that's not even something that I feel like most parents would even think about giving their kids at this point.
And and it almost seems like a necessity because everything, if we keep going technologically, like so dependent, information keep getting updated. Encyclopedias could never keep up. They
Mm-hmm.
honestly couldn't. They would have to be changed like every single week at the very least. Like, um, but because everything's changing and then everything's like it's in the clouds, it's on the internet. You can change and update information just like that. I don't know. It's strange because like at the same time, like I am also in the party with people where like, oh, I don't want my kids to have a smartphone that young. That also does creep me out when I see like 7-year olds holding like an iPhone 8 and like this is bigger than you. That can kind of concern me because I didn't get a phone until I was in 6th grade. And that was because my sister was no longer attending the same school as me. So I was like, oh. But I remember like going to an elementary school for tutoring and I would be and they would ask to play on my cell phone and I'm like, wait, you know how to do this? Like you can already okay. So that always concerns me because I am like I do appreciate a lot of my like elementary school. Like I still did the thing with your parents are like, go outside and play, I need to do stuff in the house. And then you were just forbidden to go inside the house until they called you back in. But like that's where a lot of like fun and creativity roamed because I remember being pretending to be like witches and making brews with like the things you find in your backyard, or we have a swimming pool so we pretend to be like mermaids or like fairies and all these fun things that you just I don't know if how kids are playing anymore. Like I still am so surprised when I see kids biking and stuff outside. Like first of all, I'm surprised because I'm like, hey, it's a pandemic going on, but like sure. But two, I'm just like, oh, people are still playing outside. Okay, that's a relief.
No, I agree with that. I know, like, for me, I did have like a phone just because I was like going to a bus stop and it didn't stop immediately like in front of my house. So my parents wanted me to have like a cell phone, but it wasn't a smartphone. I didn't get a smartphone until middle school, high schoolish. And so just that like whole thing, privacy is another thing and security. I just don't see how like giving a kindergartner $1,000 phone is safe for your own like personal information and also safe for them. Like that's something that could be so easily stolen. And I don't want to like have a kid get hurt just because they have an expensive piece of equipment as their phone. Like, I don't know.
We're very strange. We're in a very strange generation where we've grown. Cause I remember having to use the little blue Ethernet cable to get the internet, and I remember like we don't like our home phones technically don't work anymore. We still have them, but I remember like the home phone and then being able to like if you picked up the home phone from another place, like you could listen in on the other person's call. What was that all about? um, like I still very much remember not having the internet at my fingertips. and like the only games on the computer were Minesweeper and like pinball and solitaire.
Minesweeper, stop it. Oh my gosh, that just brought up so many different memories. Just wow.
Was
Mm.
super bad at that game, didn't understand how that worked until very recently, embarrassingly enough. But I used to play like solitaire a ton. Um, and then I don't know, like 2008 or something happened, and I feel like everything. Because I remember when my dad first had the iPhone 3, he held on to that iPhone 3 for way longer than anyone thought he should have. Because while my dad was on an iPhone 3, I had the iPhone 5. Like, we were like, time to move on, dad. But when he had that iPhone 3 and he was the only one in the family that had the smartphone, the only thing on there was like music and like barely anything else. Like, I don't know if you saw that tweet going around, but it was like, remember the simple times? And it was like a screenshot of like old like apps that like the old YouTube logo, like Doodle Jump, Temple Run, Angry Birds.
Stop,
And I was
Temple
like,
Run.
I was like, oh my goodness, it's crazy.
Man, I remember like in middle school, the cool thing wasn't to have a phone. The cool thing was like to have an iPad and bring that to school. And like after like classes, if they like ended slightly early, but you still had to obviously stay in class, everybody would just pull out like their iPad to be like having Snapchat on your iPad, your big iPad. And you're just like, I can't
I
even imagine. Now everybody's Snapchat scores is like 300,000. And I'm just like, y'all used to like do the Snapchat with no filters back in those days, back in like middle school, 7th grade, 8th grade. Those were the like good old days.
It is crazy. I don't know. Things progress at such an exponential rate because, and it's weird because I feel like, and I see this in myself, it's like I'm getting way too spoiled with how good internet is. And just like my demands for things are just stupidly high. Like if something doesn't come fast enough, if this video doesn't load fast enough, I remember waiting for that YouTube video to buffer for like 10 minutes, and now if it buffers for 2 seconds, I'm like, oh, how can this be? How are we like this? Like, and I remember like if I see a video in 480, my eyes are like, ooh, what's that? And I'm like, oh my goodness, my standards are just so oddly high that I'm like, oh no, because I didn't used to be like this. And oh, the other thing that I've noticed in myself is that like my attention span has gotten worse. Or I feel the need to multitask all the time. Like I can't just be doing one thing. I must be doing multiple things. Like if I even like let's just say I'm like editing a video and obviously I need to be listening to the sounds in the video, but sometimes there's like 5 seconds of silence and I'm like, I gotta be listening to music while I edit. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. That's dumb. I can't play music while I'm editing video that has music. But it's just this need to always be doing multiple things at the same time. Like my screen is oftentimes like a dual screen because I'm like I gotta have multiple tabs and I gotta see them both at the same time. And I feel like that because of the internet and just like this constant need to do something. Which is why again, like we talked a little bit before, I'm so appreciative of not doing anything. Like the permission to do nothing is very relieving and much needed.
Yes, man, you brought up like so many like really really good points because like I have the exact same issue. I have to like go and like transcribe interviews, and what am I doing during that? I'm trying to watch Netflix at the same time. How can I pay attention to 3 different voices? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine because obviously I'm gonna have to X out of Netflix or Spotify while trying to transcribe an interview. Or the same thing with like editing YouTube videos. I'm listening to music or another YouTube video in the background because I'm like, ooh, yay, multitasking. And it's just like, you'd probably get everything done like way faster if you just like did one thing at a time. But like, that's not really how our generation works. Like you mentioned too, like we want to do like the dual like screen tabs. Like I'm looking at one thing, typing out something completely different on the other side. And that's like how I learned how to like learn and like progress, I guess, in this like generation. But like kind of going back to like your last point about, you know, enjoying like the quiet. That's something that the summer before college, after we had gotten back from like the summer program, because you did go to the summer program too, I felt like that was such a like relief, even if it was like 5 weeks before like school ended up starting. It was just so weird for me because I've never actually had like a summer or a break of any kind that was just like completely a break ever since like elementary school. I always had summer reading, or if it wasn't summer reading, it was like summer workouts for soccer or whatever the heck I was doing at that point. It was never just like, yo, you can do whatever you want. Like, you don't have to do anything right now. You could literally just like sleep if that's what you want to do. Like, I love that about college. Love it.
That's true. That was one of the biggest things that I noticed with like college breaks are genuinely a break because that class is over. It was not like that in high school. Like you were on, at least I was on a semester system. So when it was a break, we still had stuff to do over the break, whether it's like another project or whatever. But here it's like, okay, I'm done. Like I'm done for that, and there's nothing to do, and it's like, thank goodness.
Yeah. Not gonna lie, like that was one thing where it's like I love that I have an internship, and I know you also have an internship, and it's great. But it's also on the other hand, it's like it's so nice to be able to just like have the ability to say, you know, I am not required to do anything right now, because once college restarts, it's like boom, boom, boom. There's so many things that are due. It's like you kind of need that time to like actually fully relax.
And a lot of the things I was doing over the summer, it just so that I could look better for colleges. And what I'm doing now is so that I look better for the workforce.
That
Like I'm not ever doing whenever yes, I do these things for like my personal development and like my growth. But at the same time I'm always doing it for someone else. And when I do nothing, it's for myself, which is I think why it feels like and I have no expectations of myself when I'm doing nothing. The expectation is nothing. But yeah, it's in between, like when you graduate high school and then when you're about to start college, there's that sort of like gray gap. And I just like remember taking full advantage after we were done with the AIM program because I still think I was like that AIM program really spoke to the outperformer like outstanding like high expectation high overachiever mindset in me because I was like even before the college year started I gotta get a head start like no so now it's like and now it's always going to be internship and then it's the workforce and then you're never it's just such a weird dichotomy to be in because nothing I did like in junior and senior year, I would say was genuinely for me. Maybe I learned to love it on the way there, but because we had service hours was a graduation requirement at my high school. And I enjoyed at the point that I volunteered at, genuinely. Like my coworkers there were real fun, had a stories. Not all of them are good, but you know, some of them are just strange. But though it was fun, and I realized that I really enjoyed doing community service, but at the same time, like I was doing it also with the intention so that it would look better on my high school resume because every single class you have to be better or you have to seem somehow more exceptional than the the past few that they've already seen. Like they've already heard the immigrant sob story, so I can't be writing that on my essay. They don't want to hear about that for the millionth time. Like my parents' immigrant stories is not much different from anybody else's. So it's this weird like, and every generation after us is gonna be feeling the same way. Well, who knows? This pandemic with this whole like removal of the ACT, SAT scores, I'm like, dang it, I want that. I literally texted my sister because there's like a tweet or something with a news article that was saying something like how 7 out of the 8 Ivy Leagues have decided to forego the ACT SAT requirement, and I was like, might fuck around and transfer.
I feel
But
that.
it's just like, don't do that to yourself. I was like, I got into UPenn once, maybe I can do it again.
I feel like you could. Just saying. You're amazing.
I don't think I could handle the big universities. I've been spoiled by the like small classroom, the professors knowing my name at Washington and the universities, and now I'm like, and also they're paying me, so I'm not gonna give up that scholarship.
Johnson's in the house. I'm telling you. Oh my gosh. I wonder now, like, where do you think that like the overachiever mindset came from? Because I know, like, for me, it's like I had the exact same like ideas, kind of like even starting from ninth grade, going into ninth grade, I had a list of like what schools do I want to like prepare myself to go into. It's funny how that list is so different from the schools that I actually ended up applying to, because it was like Stanford because I love California, UC Berkeley. I didn't apply to either of those schools. Some of the Ivies, they stayed on there, but it's just so interesting to me, like you're almost like kind of groomed as a child into thinking like the path is middle school, high school, you graduate, you're going to college, you go to a great college, so you have to really prepare in high schools to get that great ACT, SAT scores, and then after you graduate from like an amazing college, then you're going to get a 6-figure job. Like that's the path. There is no other path outside of that. Yes, YouTubers are starting to kind of change that. There's good and like bad to that whole story too, but I wonder where that overachieving mindset kind of started, because I absolutely understand it for myself too.
I think I would say it started pretty much in elementary school. Like I had, like this was something I've always had on, like this was sort of always the mindset I've had. And I think it's partly due to societal pressure, especially because I am an Asian American woman. So this is weird model minority that I thought I had to uphold. And then also parental pressures of, because they're seen as model minorities, I think they subconsciously also expect the same. And also just because like the education in China is much more rigorous than it is in America. So like the expectations were always higher in the household. Like I remember my mom telling me that a neighbor of ours, we're really close friends with them, but how their parents would be very excited when their daughters would get B's. And she was always like, and she came back to me, like, I don't understand why they're so happy with that. B's are not good. B's are just okay. And I was like, well, they think C is okay, and B is good, and A is great. And she's like, no, A is good, B is okay, C is not good. And but they were never very much like, oh, if you don't get an A, you're gonna get like disowned or something. But they were always very concerned when my grades were dropped or if I got a lower test score or whatever. But they trusted me enough that I would keep the final grade would be an A, because that's what they care about more, is that my final grades were an A. But yeah, because ever since, and being seen as like a smart child at a very young age, forever, it's like, oh, being placed into advanced math and advanced writing, like in elementary school, sort of continually sets you up on that, because people was like, oh, she's the smart one, she's the one that I can always go to. And then like even just like I would be insanely or aggressively competitive in places that didn't matter. Like we had something called AR, which is like reading, right? Like, and I would try to read as many books as I can, accumulate as many points as I could, make sure that all of my reading tests were like 100% or something, but even just like that initial reading where they place you in whatever book color that you can read, I would always try to get to the upper one so that I could read like black level books and purple level books, you know. And the other thing is like I also had a very high achieving sister. Like my older sister is 3 years older than me, and we went to the same elementary school. And she was also very smart and like sort of like she calls herself sort of a lazy genius. Like information comes to her a lot easier than it ever came to me. Um, as per my disability, which I know we'll talk about later. But so having that, everyone loved my sister, and I looked up greatly to my sister, and I wanted to be like her. So there was also that pressure, like, okay, my sister was good, and I also need to be good. Otherwise, it's going to be like, what wrong with you? Like, what happened to you? And so it's sort of, and then it just never stopped once you hit junior high, because then some people I went to elementary school with came to the same junior high as I did, still remained very high achieving or got good grades. And then that formulated what people thought about me. And since I went to my junior high and high school were the same, I was almost stuck with the same people for 6 years that they kept having high expectations of me. And so it's a combination of like stereotypes, parental pressure, and also like a need to prove that they're right, that I wasn't going to be the exception to what they said, that I wasn't going to be like the not, like I didn't want to be seen as not the smart one for whatever reason. So yeah, it's a weird combination, but I don't remember not ever thinking this way, especially because I was placed into advanced math when I was in third grade.
Mm. I completely understand that. I feel like it's slightly like on the flip side for me, since I am also the oldest, and it's more like in terms of like defeating stereotypes, it's more like defeating that, oh, lazy black person type stereotype. Like, no, I'm very high achieving to a certain extent. And like as a kid, I was always told like you're gonna have to work twice as hard just to get to the like starting line. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to work so hard just to be able to try and make it to the same spot as everybody else. So like I will say though, like I'm happy that my parents didn't really pressure me per se, because they kind of just saw that like I was self-disciplined to a certain extent, and we're just kind of like, okay, we trust her. Obviously, like they expected like good grades from me, but it was more of, okay, she's a self-starter. We trust her to hear what we have said, hear what we have told you, and now kind of like encourage yourself to kind of get you as far as you can to a certain extent. But it's definitely really interesting to kind of like look into like what pressures were put on you when you were a kid, and like how does that affect like the like arc of your own like kind of like character arc, if you want to even call it that. It's just kind of interesting to look into.
There's also just different, it's like, and also like being, I think, just like a woman of color, there's this weird like you have to be high achieving in order to be considered remotely at the same level of any man. Like, especially if you're a white straight male, then you're kind of like, oh, you're seen as the standard, and I need to be like 10 times better than you to be even considered in the same ballpark as where you are. And it's so, and there's like weird expectations in the Asian community where like I thought for a long time that I needed to be a doctor or a lawyer because those are the few viable career path, which is you either become a doctor, you either become a lawyer, an engineer. Um, yeah, those are like the main three. More, less and less, like it, you'll see that I think with every generation, but and it's because like it's a genuine concern, and that's why like education was always highly valued, because it's your number one, it's the best ticket you have out of to getting yourself started, and not like your parents moved all the way to America, did all this, and you're just gonna waste it. You're just gonna give it up and not get a job or whatever. Like, no, I could have never imagined doing that, because I want to be able to sort of repay everything that my parents have done for me. So it's like always finding, like, because I remember discussing in senior year, like, oh, people would always ask like what career or what dream job I wanted to do, and I never had an answer to that. But I knew a friend of mine who would say that like he wanted to major in like graphic design, and he or photography, and he wanted to become a photographer. And in my head, I was sort of like, that won't make you enough money. Because in my head, if you have because the thing in my head, it seems much more like a hobby. Like if you enjoy photography, you can do that on the side. Like just because I enjoy writing doesn't mean I want to become a writer. Like I can always write on the side, but that's but like your main job should be something that can be keep you financially stable, because that's the biggest concern. It Once you're financially stable, then you can start considering other luxuries. Whereas this guy, he was so secure in the fact that like financial concerns were just not the top of his list, and I was like, I don't know. It was like immigrant parents are very often like in and out of jobs sometimes, so there's always like a concern, and because they don't like to talk finances with you, but there's always like a sneaking suspicion that things are not as good as they used to be. That I was like, okay, financial security is always in the top of my list, and then I can, if I have time, then I'll do the things that I like on the side. But the things I like is never the, because there's that quote, right? That's like, if you love what you do, then there's never a day that feels like work. And I'm like, that's BS. Even if you love what you do, it's gonna feel like work. There are just gonna be days when it feels like work. Like that's BS. No. So I might as well get something that makes me have a comfortable living, and then figure out, and then like have my luxuries then.
Yeah. I think like that kind of just shows again where it's like the priorities. It's not like, oh my gosh, I want to like pursue my passion. No, it's I want to pursue financial stability, because to a certain extent you're able to prove yourself if you can like go through the entire like educational process, get an amazing job, not necessarily a job that you love. Like it would be great, it would be a bonus if you loved it also, but get a job that can actually set you up for the rest of your life and be able to have like a great retirement fund, to be able to have like the husband and kids and like have like be able to achieve that true like American dream type thing. Although like Great Gatsby will tell you that the American dream just is unattainable, but that's a question for another day. But I think that definitely kind of like feeds into that whole logic of it's hard. Do you like go after your passions, or do you kind of like go after comfort and like having that material cushion behind you? Because let's not pretend like being a starving artist is like that great. We love to romanticize that idea of like slumming it in New York and like going from couch to couch and just doing what you love, but like is that really like what you want to do and want to make out of your life? I feel like a lot of us would say no. Although it would be great for a moment, but I don't know. It's definitely interesting. Okay. So you did kind of mention earlier, so I wonder kind of like how does that like feed into your story of how you do have like a disability that is unseen for the most part, at least like looking directly at you, you wouldn't like automatically assume. So how did that kind of factor into like your development as a person and also into like you going through the educational system? How was that?
So I am hard of hearing. I have bilateral hearing loss, with hearing aids in both of my ears. I didn't get hearing aids until like the summer before sixth grade. My mom had always suspected that I had problems, and even my preschool teacher, because I wasn't pronouncing things correctly. I wasn't saying my S's, so it's sort of these silent sounds. So I was placed into speech therapy in kindergarten, and I got speech therapy in 7th grade. So we had a lot of years of being in speech therapy, but I didn't understand a lot of it until I had been diagnosed with hearing loss, because when I was in speech therapy, I mean, I don't remember the ones in kindergarten and 1st grade, but like starting like in 4th grade and whatever, I started to be like, well, why do I need this? Okay, if I'm friends with people who have lisp and they can't, or in my head, like speak right, where I'm having to go into speech therapy every week for what I think I sound perfectly fine in, like, why do I have to keep doing this? And I had a lot of, I think, temperamental issues, because I was just like, I didn't understand why I couldn't express my feelings correctly. So I would often just cry and be angry all the time. Like I thought that was just like hormonal times, but it was just like I would often genuinely frustrated at like how I couldn't express myself the way that I wanted to, how others couldn't understand why I couldn't understand them, because what what being hard of hearing does, or at least in my experience, is that mm, from the way that my mom has explained it to me, is that like oftentimes if you are hard of hearing, you like that child reading comprehension will not be as good. And my mom wanted to make sure she combated that, because again, even though I wasn't diagnosed at a young age, because every doctor was like, oh no, it's just a small thing, like it's not going to be that big of a deal. And my mom was like, I don't buy that for 1 second. But she read stuff aloud, and then she would quiz me on the stuff that I read. She would like ask me to tell her stories at night, just so that I could practice all of these sort of reading comprehension stuff. So, but even still, sometimes there are just words and that I come across that are just incredibly difficult. Like I find it really tough to do word problems in math. I'll read it like 10 times and it will make no sense in my head. Like I can't visualize it. I don't know how to translate it into, so like that was always a really strange thing. And like sometimes when I would ask the teacher, like in junior high, like to explain what this sentence means, they're like, what do you not understand? I'm like, all of it. I don't understand at all what this is asking of me to do. Like I don't know how to explain to you that I don't know what this means. And that was always difficult. The other thing was like, because I went to speech therapy, and after being in 6th grade and sort of focusing more on how I talk, like after getting hearing aids in 6th grade and focusing more on how I talk, I started practicing more, because I had always been lip reading, and then I wanted to get better at it for my own sake, because I didn't know how to do sign language. That's sort of the one thing that I never learned how to do, because I went to a hearing school all my life that I never learned how to do sign language. And so I mainly just lip read. Um, and so a lot, and now resulted in me sounding like this, which a lot of people assume is an accent. And a lot of people assume it's an accent because I look Asian, like I'm not born here. So I get that question a lot. Not just like I would have gotten that question regardless of how I talk, but because of how I talked, it doesn't help at all, that it doesn't confirm to them anything. It, in fact, it's like, no, you sound strange. Like, where are you from? And I've gotten made fun of how I talk a lot, because I enunciate more than the average person. And yeah, so that was always, that like never felt good. And that's why like I mainly did not like hearing my voice, because I was like, I sound strange. I don't sound like everyone around me. Um, and then it was, and I remember getting my hearing aids, and I remember crying and I would not because I was happy to be getting them. Um, it was because now I realized at the time I had something that would forever mark me as someone who is disabled, and I thought that was a bad thing because the first time when we were sort of debating this idea and sort of preparing for it, I remember running into another student at my elementary school who had hearing aids. They were much larger than the ones that I was planning to get, but I noticed that he had them, and I was very excited because I was like, okay, this is kind of a normal thing. And then I remember approaching him. Maybe I could have done this better, but I was only like sixth grade, or I was only in fifth grade at the time, and so this guy was in sixth grade, and I approached him and I was like, "That's so cool, and you have hearing aids." And I remember him being very much like, "So what about it? Like, why you like?" And it was such a negative experience in my head, and I've never had anyone talk to me so angrily like that. That I was kind of like, "This is not a good thing." Like, and so I didn't want hearing aids. I didn't want to be seen as like different or whatever. And it's hard because I'm someone who thinks I can be self-sufficient, but now I have to be very dependent on something, and I didn't like sort of having that control being taken away from me. And I was so annoyed at everything. I was like, since I already went in hating the idea, like after I got hearing aids, I was just mad about hearing anything. I was like, I don't like the sound of AC. I was like, this is so annoying. Like, why the hell? Like, I don't, bird chirping, so annoying. What the fuck? I was like, no, this is awful. Like, I preferred not hearing anything, which is obviously my mind has changed because I would be missing out on a lot of stuff. I would be missing out on a lot of people's voices and whatnot. But it's always like a weird thing to remind yourself because my disability is one of the few identities that I'm reminded of always every single day because I put it in my ears every single day, and it comes with its own set of problems, and it's like I remember like I would never, this comes some good side. It's like I can never I don't often hear when people talk behind my back because I just don't hear it. So but like music is a very big part of my life. So those are some frustrating aspects when like my teacher will let me hear recordings and it's like, oh, do you hear how the way he made this sound? And I'm like, honestly, this all sounds the same to me. I don't know what I'm looking for. I can't, I don't have perfect pitch. Okay, didn't have that and will probably never have that. My intonation is horrible. Okay, that also could just be because I grew up playing the piano and not an instrument that needs to be tuned every time. But then when I was in band, and my band director would always be like, okay, make sure you listen across the room. And I'm like, I can barely hear myself. So we're not going to do that because I don't know how to do that. I can't listen across the room because my hearing aids automatically try to diminish background noises. So that's not going to work. So there's a lot of just like, I'm just like, well, I hope this is right. And like, so that was always hard. But I was lucky to have a piano teacher that was I had when I was very young, and so we sort of like grew together. She's seen me ugly crying a ton. That's always fun. That's how you become real good friends with your piano teacher. But she sort of shifted in how she taught me. So like instead of just like showing me on the piano, she'll do it on my shoulder. So she's like, this is the pressure that I want you to put, and she'll do it on my shoulders instead. Or she'll make me feel like she'll do it on, and she'll make me feel her wrist so that I understand it better. Um, those sort of like smaller things, like because in my head, what I think is like considered quiet or piano is not quiet enough. Or if I think something is forte, it's like way too loud. So it's sort of like figuring out how to do with that. Um, and other aspects of like, I didn't need that much disability accommodation, or so I thought, because I only started requesting accommodation in 10th grade because we had AP. I knew because of the history class we would be running into a lot of documentaries. And oh my goodness, as much as I love documentaries, they are one of my biggest weaknesses. I did not know that subtitles were not a given because we always put the subtitles on in my household. My parents are not native like American English speakers, so it's always helpful for them. And then I always put them on because, it was always easier. I guess I didn't really understand why I felt like I needed them when I was younger. So I would always ask if I could have them on, and I was always very embarrassed too. I didn't like being singled out and being like, could you put the captions on? Because for years and years, I've heard how annoying captions can be, or how like closed captions can be for other people. They're like, it's annoying, it's distracting, I don't want to read while I watch. And that's always been a very strange notion to me. I'm like, okay, what? And so I didn't want to be the person that was like that. And especially as YouTube has started putting auto-generated captions. And I always try to explain how auto-generated captions are better than no caption, because what it takes away trying to solve that puzzle. And most of the time, if they do get it wrong, I have enough context clues giving with the right caption word that I can figure out what the person had meant to say. And so, but very few times will teachers do that because they'll write something wrong or something inappropriate, like a cuss word or whatever, in the auto-generated caption, and they don't want that in the school setting, which I understand. But I was like, okay, I mean, could you not do this just for me? Like, otherwise, but oftentimes it would be no, and then I would have to ask for the video link afterwards, watch it on my own time, taking more time out of my day. So like I would always be the person who would be watching that documentary again at home because there either wasn't caption or like they couldn't find the caption until 10th grade, where I had such a wonderful understanding history teacher, and she went above and beyond, and I was like, goodness gracious, I could have been living like this instead. And everything had subtitles, or if it was something that didn't have it, she would print out a transcript or even an like outline, and it was just so helpful. Like I couldn't how, and I'm like, there is a reason I got the 5 on the AP World History, and it's because of her. Like, had she not have gone, make sure that I was able to understand in class, I don't think I could have passed that class. That class is just notoriously hard, but I think it would have been extra difficult if I kept having to take time out of my day after school to rewatch everything, to re-listen to everything. It was just really difficult. Um, there's a lot of things that make me feel like I have to, like, and it, going back to the self-dependent, or like wanting to be independent but having to be dependent on something. It's like I rely on my sister and like my friends at times. I don't understand anything. Like my best friend in high school, still my best friend now. It's funny because after like 6 years of knowing each other, like sometimes I just look at him and then he'll repeat what that person said to me, because we've just gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't know what the person said at all, and I don't want to ask. My sister is very much the same way. There's a lot of things that have to be done over the phone that I can't do, like credit cards and debit card activation. I always get my sister to pose as me so that I can get my debit card activated, because I'm like, that's why I don't have a voicemail on my phone, because I forgot to set it up in time and I didn't realize there was like a time limit on that stuff or whatever. But It's also just wouldn't be conductive. Like if you knew me, you would text me or email me, something I can visually read, because your voicemail is not only just gonna get lost, but also I won't be able to understand you. So like but I think things have been improving. There's more transcription services. I know that like voicemails now have that transcription services. Skype has like transcription on them or something like that. There's more like, I mean, first of all, I have better hearing aids, which means I can hear more stuff louder and I can adjust the volume as I need to, which can be really annoying that it's better though, because um, I can't talk to friends when it's super windy because all I can hear is wind, and that is incredibly annoying. Like it feels like I have movie wind sounds in my head and I hate that. So oftentimes I'm like, if I'm walking with a friend on campus and it's super windy, I'm like, let's just not talk because I'm not gonna hear you. It's that sort of thing, which is why I chose Washington and Lee. Like I feel like for if you are disabled, you are always considering how your disabilities can play out on a certain place. So like my top contenders were not only just things that I enjoyed, like, oh, this campus is really pretty, they have the clubs that I want or whatever. These may could do well if I was in a big lecture hall with 400 plus students and trying to, because if I sit in the front seat so that I can hear the professors better, but if they call somebody all the way in the back row, I'm not going to be able to hear them. So it's like, okay, I need to be in a place where it has smaller classrooms, a smaller setting, so that the classrooms are smaller and then the class sizes are smaller and I'm able to hear other people better. Because 30 people is pushing it. Like our journalism class was pushing it for me. Like that would be hard because sometimes somebody would say something across the room and I'm like, I hope what they said wasn't important. It's always why I try to be the first one to talk in a discussion, because I can't, I will probably say something somebody else has already made a point of. And I hate being that person, like, that just repeated what somebody said. So it's like, it's it's good and it's bad, and it's just like I've learned to embrace my identity as a disabled person. Took a long time, but I'm like wouldn't have changed it because it's what makes me unique, and I like being able to like have other ways of communicating, because like I can lip read. This is always something that people ask me, is how I sort of talk to others or communicate. And I always try to explain it to them like it's a puzzle, that if I'm missing words, it's me, it's whatever the sound was plus the lip movement and then context clues, and then I figure out what the word is. And that's why my brain is always going all the time, because I always have to be active in a conversation. If I am not active, I will be guaranteed to miss something in the conversation. It's like, that's why another thing is like, I don't think I could ever be a journalist, because there's so much listening involved, like, and transcribing and stuff. And I'm always a second late. And that second to like comprehend is very crucial when you're trying to write down quotes in a place where you're not allowed to record said story that you want to be reporting on. And so that's like my biggest fear, is why I don't like reporting on like panels and whatnot, because it's just a lot for me to keep up with. It's a lot for me to try and do. That's why phone call interviews I just don't understand how to do them, and it's why I always try to do emails or something where it's recorded, because it's just, it takes so much effort for me to listen. That's why I get so exhausted in social settings, not because I'm an introvert, but because it uses a ton of brain power for me to be in conversations, but the world is built to listen. Everything is built to listen. So it's very hard for me to like sometimes engage. I remember Sujana, my roommate, hear everything and music going, I don't hear anything. And she came in, like she ran into the room and she's like, "Do you hear that?" And I was like, "What?" And like I took out my earbuds. I'm like, "What?" She's like, "The fire alarm is going off." And I was like, and the thing is, like, I should have been able to see it, but because our dorm room has like a tiny hallway, like, and that's where the fire alarm is, and from my angle, I couldn't see anything. And also, I was looking at my computer, so I wasn't seeing anything in general, like besides my computer. That I was just like, shit. Okay. And but I kept thinking like, what if when they were doing that fire like drill, like the firefighters came around and they just opened the door and they just found me just typing away on my essay and were like, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I'd be like, "What the hell are you doing here?" Like, I just am always like, "Oh, I'm so grateful that I had her," and she knew like I wouldn't have known. Like she's woken me up a couple of times because I wouldn't have woken up to my alarm sometimes. That's always a fun one. The only reason I have an Apple Watch is so that I have another thing to vibrate me awake when I'm away from home. Like, I know people say it's not good to sleep with your phone, but that phone is like with the like ringer on, it's like on my chest. I'm like, no way, I can't wake up this way. Like, or like it's underneath my head or something. So like probably not healthy or whatever. But because it's like I can't hear anything when I go to sleep, which is great because I'm a heavy sleeper and that means I get great nights of rest. But and like when people are like, "Oh, it's so noisy and I can't sleep," I'm like, not a problem. I'm sleeping. My sister always complains about like yard work or dogs barking, waking her up, and I'm like, didn't know. Um, so yeah, it's just like it's very small, subtle things that I think you constantly feel like you're not a part of. And I think college, I think, just exacerbated the issue because in high school, once I left school, like then I was in an environment that was like very accommodating. Like my parents are always super nice about it, um, and they're always understanding. They've never treated me differently. If anything, they treat me differently because I deserve it sometimes, and that's just because I'm a naughty child. But in college, it's so strange how we like so much of our lives are like interacted based on listening, and so much of my life is not like it's me trying to make up for that. Like when I think about, especially with these hearing aids, so they're rechargeable. So, but they only last for a whole day. So like I have to recharge them every night. But sometimes with louder environments, more batteries get drained. So sometimes if it goes too late into the night, then my batteries will die and then I'm sort of just left with like earplugs in my ears, technically. So like I've left parties early a lot of times because I was like, my batteries are dead, I can't go on. It's not safe for me to be out any longer. I hate holding conversations at parties because A, it's dark in there. B, I can't hear anything. And C, people want to whisper at parties or whisper into my ears. And I'm like, I can't do that. Like I was so bad at the game telephone, but everyone thought that's what made it funny. And it just made me feel very embarrassed to ever play that game. Like it was such a, it's always, telephone is one of the few like icebreaker games that I just was like, if you're gonna play it, I need to opt out because I refuse to feel like because you know they go back and like, where did we mess up? And it's always me. And I was like, and I hate it. I was like, I don't, such the perfectionist, and I don't want to be the one to bring the team down. I'm like, I don't like feeling that way. So, and a lot of the things that I make sure like I consume are like captioned. So like I try to retweet things that have captioned videos on them or easy enough or short enough to figure it out yourself. it's like these sort of things that like they're just so small and subtle that like I probably don't think about them a lot until I'm asked to, as if like right now. But yeah, I it never I don't want to say never inconveniences because these are inconveniences for sure. But I don't want to ever say that like it made my quality of life worse because I'm still grateful that I'm only hard of hearing. Like I'm still able to hear, and I'm thankful every day for that because there are long bouts time in my life where my left ear was clogged completely and I couldn't hear anything out of that ear. So like I always have to get like shots in my ear, which is not fun. They taste bad. It feels horrible, and it's why I don't like getting shots anymore. It's because I just have like one too many traumas of getting shots in my ears that I just like don't enjoy getting shots in general. Like I can't. Um, so so there was just a lot of times where like my right ear was the only one that was working, and I don't ever want to repeat that. Those were some horrible months and years of my life, and I haven't had that in a while. Don't want to jinx that, knock on wood. But it's it's always been a complicated thing because as much as I'm grateful, it's also harder for people to understand because if I was just deaf, people would understand, oh, you can't hear anything, and that's easy. It's like, but hard of hearing is like you can't hear some of the time, but I can't choose when I can't hear, and so that makes it frustrating for people on both ends because like why is it that I chose to not be able to understand those moments or these moments, and it's like, and sometimes it's hard because I can't understand accents sometimes, and that's not their fault, and I don't want to ever change how the way they speak or the way it's like I can't do anything on my end, and it's just so there are some professors that I just never want to take classes from because it would just make it hard on both of us. And it's one of the weird standards I have for my friends. Like if you are a close friend of mine, it's one of the qualifications in my head is that I can understand you well. Like you enunciate stuff. You're a good friend of mine. Like if you're someone that I kind of always have trouble talking to, it's not that I don't love you. You're probably such a great person, but you're gonna just remain as a friend slash acquaintance because it's really difficult for me to continue having conversation without exhausting my brain power and without exhausting your exasperation of like, why do I have to repeat everything 3 times to this person? That's annoying. So it's various like small thoughts like this that kind of how I live because I feel like accommodation wise, as long as you give me closed captions and let me record audios or give me materials ahead of time, those are very easy academic accommodations that people can do, like no oral listening tests. So like for all of my Chinese exams, I have it in person so that I can read their lips. Um, but otherwise, it's more like environmental things. It's more like daily interactions that I see my disability impacting a lot more. I rambled on a lot, but
No, that was like really, really great. And I think that you mentioned like something that we don't tend to think about, which is how interconnected all of the senses are. Because the fact that like you can't necessarily hear, but then like your piano teacher being able to allow you to like feel to know, okay, let me play quieter. Because also as a former pianist, we're not going to go back to those days of competitions. No, ma'am. No, thank you. But like, I could easily imagine that because I can think about like myself, like not having my wrist high enough, that sort of like smaller things, but how important it is for something like piano and how amazing it was that your teacher kind of like thought about that and was able to accommodate you being amazing because you guys haven't heard her, but like Catherine is an amazing pianist. Like
I haven't
very,
practiced in a
very
while.
high quality. Don't pretend.
Yeah, and the visual helps a lot because the main way I get around is lip reading. I think I've gotten so reliant that if I don't see someone, I feel like I'm lost. It's really crazy how I'm like, oh gosh, I really need to be able to see the person. That's why documentaries are so tough, especially British documentaries. As much as I enjoy hearing them narrate, I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. Either I'm way too distracted by the bears or I just can't understand you. Probably both. So yeah, it's nice to see where my like senses make up for it or how easily, and that's why I always say like I'm very adaptable. It's because I'm always one step behind. You'll notice a lot people find this kind of strange. I can predict when jokes are gonna happen. I can predict when I need to laugh. At the Monica Lewinsky talk, I heard 2% of what she said. Honestly, like genuinely did not under. I would just like I just felt grateful that I was in her presence. I was like, whatever. I get to see her, and that's enough. But I remember there would be jokes, and I would just laugh. I didn't know what the joke was, but I just laughed anyway because the situation called for it. And I was like, this is a very normal thing to do. But I remember telling somebody, and it was like, you just laugh whenever. And I'm like, yeah, I just know when to laugh. Like I know when, like, and you just adapt. You like, or if you start to hear someone laugh, you laugh as well. And just like, I know I'm always a step behind, so I always try to make up for it by being able to like change on the fly, being able to go with the flow. And that's the thing that I'm really glad that or the skill that I'm really glad to have, because I consider one of my biggest strengths is that I'm very adaptable to certain situations because I've always had to adapt my whole life because the world is not built for those with disabilities. It's built for those who are able-bodied. And so I'm always adapting. Like I'm always adapting it to my needs and my whatever is best for me. So it's that's a downside, but it's one of the things that I'm glad to have learned because of my disability.
That's wow. I'm just so happy that you felt comfortable sharing that story because there were a lot of details that I have not heard before, especially like about the kid in 6th grade. You never told me about that. And I
I
can't believe,
haven't. It's something I kind of forgot about because it was such a nasty experience, and I remember feeling so hurt about it that I was like, this is just not a positive thing for people. But the more that I tutor, like, I often get placed with kids that have disabilities because, um, like, I understand the struggle. So, and like, the first tutoring lesson is always just trying to figure out their learning style because I'm like, you have different ways of learning. Everyone has different ways of learning. But if you have a disability, it's even like it's harder for sometimes for you to figure that out because you're in a classroom setting and there's one specific way the teacher teaches. And if that doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Like you so so it's always trying to fix like how they take in information or how they self teach it to themselves after the class. So like I was never one for like documentaries are good and all that, but if they're very audio reliant, like in the sense that like the only thing you're showing me are visual depictions, but you're never showing me like graphs or anything that like tells me like that correlate to what you're saying. Like for example, if it says like if there's a fact, it's like salmon goes like this fast, and it's just like a salmon just like swimming in a river peacefully that doesn't tell me how fast it goes, like it doesn't say 35 miles per hour on the screen, then it's harder for me to retain those information. So I'm always doing things in a more visual sense. And it's why I bullet journal. I guess we can pan to that, but it's why I do things in a more visual style because I don't like if you I've seen so many people in like movies, they'll be like, hey Siri, what's my plan for the day? And then Siri will like, oops, I just activated my own Siri. But they're like, to tell you the plan. And I'm like, how are you supposed to is that helpful? That's not helpful to me. I'm like, it's seeing what I need to do is helpful.
Mm. So kind of like transitioning into like journaling, how did you kind of get into journaling, and how do you also set aside time to journal? I know it's obviously easier during the summer, but I know from your Instagram for journaling that you are very detailed. So how do you kind of make sure that you have enough time to be able to get it all done, I guess?
Hmm. That's when I like consistently started to journal. I think I tried on and off, but it didn't ever like click. Um, the reason why I got into it, I don't know. Maybe it was. I think it might have been from the Tumblr community called Study Blur. Like that's the sort of studying community on Tumblr. Um, it probably was that because I first started with just by taking good notes. Like I wanted to beautify my notes so that they were prettier, but also it allowed me a chance to rewrite the materials, allowing me to study better. Um, yeah, and then from 2016, so I'm on my fifth bullet journal now. And yeah, I mean, it's like how I set aside time is different because normally what I do is a mix between weekly planning and journaling, like travel journaling slash day journaling. So, and I don't often. A lot of people who do it like months in advance. They'll just like block out a whole day, and then they'll do like all of June, all of July, and all of August or something like that. But I only do like a week at a time because and it, or like 1 or 2 weeks. I'd never really think that far. I'll do a monthly page, but I don't ever do like a whole month because I am also a very sentimental person. So I want to keep things a lot. And so I would try to make sure that's in the right time spot. But honestly, doing it on like a Sunday evening, and now I've gotten good at it, or I know certain spreads that I like, that it only took me like 30 minutes or so to do. And that sounds like a lot, but like when you're trying to plot out the whole week, it's really not that bad. But but even honestly, it would just take 10 minutes if you just divided 2 pages into like 8 columns. Or sorry, like 8 little spreads. Um, and then you would just fill it in as you need it. Because I'm gonna try to see if I can find a good. That's a different spread. Where is, because a lot of times it's like I don't fill in everything at the moment. It's just like, okay, here's Monday, here's all the things I need to do for Monday. There's other stuff in the other days, and I need to fill those in. But the ones where I travel journal, day journal, which are more like actual diary sort of entry stuff, that one is always harder. It's like stuff that looks like this. Or like, it's like, oh, I actually am trying to record memory, then that takes a lot more time. It would take hours, especially because you want to make it look good. But as you practice more, things start to look better. As you accumulate more material, things start to look better. Because my first journal looked really bad. There's a section that's just binder clipped off because it's embarrassing. But this is how it used to look like. That's not good at all.
I disagree. Stop. Those
This
spreads look like what you'd find on like Pinterest.
I mean, it's just no longer my style anymore. Like, I don't do these. These are not very helpful to me to do monthlies like that. Like, this is just okay. And that's not my, I don't know. But, like, so everyone has to start somewhere. Everyone thinks that these are good. And I'm like, these are not great. This one was okay. But, like, um, everyone starts somewhere. And like I mentioned before that I didn't consistently do it until 2016, and it's because I was also one of those people who hoarded journals, like just blank journals. and I was like, oh, I always should start something in it. But I realized that like the type of journal you do your journaling in matters. It matters because a lot of the journals that I had at the time were like notebooks that were like they were lined, and if they were lined, they were either wide ruled, and I'm sorry, but like wide rule was okay in elementary school, but it's all about college rules now if we have to do ruled. But at the same time, I don't even like ruled paper for journaling because it's too much restriction. This first one was actually a gridded one because I didn't know that there was other types. So then I moved on to dotted, which is the one. I'll just pull out my more recent one. This didn't have any stickers on it. So these are all dotted. You can barely see that, but that's the reason why I like it. It's like a grid, but without all of the actual lines in it. So once I realized that this was the type of style that I like to do, then it got easier. There are so many other different planners for different types of thinkers. Like my sister can't do bullet journaling. It's not her style, and I don't ever try to convince people to do it. If you genuinely attempted it multiple times and it doesn't work, then don't keep beating a dead bush. So she has something called a passion planner. It's already more laid out for you. You don't have to create it all by yourself. And then you're able to do whatever you like in it. The reason why I don't like to use the passion planner is because I often like I'll have a monthly, but then I'll have like things about like the day that I did or like whatever I traveled to. So this was an example of me just going day by day. Like I just drew these lines first and then I filled it in afterwards. The stickers and stuff comes afterwards too. Like see, this was if I had plotted out my whole month like by doing this, then I wouldn't have space to have like a certain travel journal aspect to it. And I like being able to do these. So it's just like figuring out what works best for you. Like I'm a hoarder and a sentimental person. That's why there's so much receipts and pictures and pamphlets in there. If you're not that type of person, then really you should stick with a planner that's already like laid out for you. Then if you're someone who needs like constraints or don't have a lot of time to spare, but I always try to make time to journal. I mean, less so now because I have all the time I need. But I always make time for journal because it is genuinely helpful for me. I find that like once you start to journal, it's hard to stop. It's hard to go back without one because you're like, what am I supposed to be doing today? Did I have something tomorrow? But it's all in here. And so it sort of organizes your week or it organizes your day. And it also, because the way that I have like little journaling, also a great memory keeper. It's like a scrapbook in some sense. And so if nothing eventful happened, then I won't have a whole page just dedicated to that. So it's just like journaling is a thing that I find very helpful because I am a visual person. And I'm also someone that has to do it myself. So there's there's a certain level of freedom and creativity that I'm able to have, but also keep myself organized. Is one of the only productive hobbies that I have is journaling on the side, and it's one of the few that I allow myself to indulge and buy stickers and buy so many notebooks. I mean, I've actually never bought any of these notebooks. People all gift to me but these are pretty expensive gifts. But they're ones that my mom doesn't mind spending a ton of money on because she knows that I use it. So yeah, it's fun. And I also like because these are blank pages, you can put whatever you want in it. Like I have goals for my year. Um And I put like my review for like movies that I've seen, to-do lists that are just like completely not related to like my day-to-day life. It's just like things I want to get done. So it's as you make it, and my brain is sort of very scatterbrained like that, and I need a place for it all to put down. And so having a blank journal like that really helps.
Nice. I know, like, for me, I use the class tracker, which is kind of like a newer type of like journaling system. I don't know how long they've been around, but I love bullet journaling, but like I'm too much of a perfectionist, I feel like, or at least with the spreads, like your early spreads is how like mine looked,
Mhm.
except I would take like Sunday and I was still using like lined paper too. So maybe I just should have like tried out different notebooks, but it would take me like 2 hours or so just to get like the entire like month spread done. And like maybe I should have just like tried to spread it out a tiny bit more, but I don't know. Ah, man, I still want to give it a try
That's
again,
something,
but we'll see.
that's something that my sister feels like because my style I've learned is that maybe I just have a steady hand, but I honestly don't care about super straight lines. I prefer it to not have straight lines. I prefer it to be like more authentic, sort of, I guess that like artisanal vibe to them. Like I don't need it to be super straight, and I prefer it not to be because I don't want it to seem like I took a ruler and did it. Like I would rather just like follow the line because there's like a certain quirk to it by having it. And because I have it all scrapbooky, it already looks like a chaotic mess, and I like it. I like it like that. I like to again like, oh, all these variety of textures. Like June 20th is up here, but then all these others are on the page. Here's all this stuff. Like I'll paperclip things into it. Like those are just like some of the fun little like textual things that I like to do. It's because I've learned that my style. I try to just I place things where they look good, and I'm not caring so much about perfectionist. Like there are some bad spreads in there. Those are the ones that I don't post to Instagram, but they're still ones that have helped because they were productive and they helped me just see what I need to get done, what homework I needed to get done. Cause the way that I've like had to journal is different. Like I did much more travel journaling or like diary entry sort of journal than I did in high school because high school it felt like I had so many assignments. But since a lot of my stuff is online, or like I think that I do is like notes and stuff is online for college, I also just like have a little page in my OneNote that's just like all the homework assignments because you have the syllabus. So I just put it all in there and I check it off as I go. So I don't necessarily do that. These are more like projects and meetings. Those are big ones. But like, yeah, and because I also use the calendar on my phone, so I don't need to always look at my planner for like when I'm gonna do meetings and whatnot. Because I don't carry this with me all the time, but I do carry my phone with me. But this is still a great way to like write your thoughts in, write your memories in, and all these sort of things. Like if anything in the summer, like it would be a good time to use it to like kind of work through how you're feeling. The thing that I like about these bullet journals is that it's completely free to do whatever you want. Do you want to sketch in it? Go ahead and sketch in it. Do you want to do some poetry in it? Write some poetry. Do you want to just angrily work out through your feelings? Go ahead. There's a ton of spreads in here that are written in a handwriting that I'm not even able to read myself. And it's just pure me being mopey, grumpy, angry, and I just needed to get it out. And I don't let myself read it, and it's not legible because it's not meant to be read again. Like it was just sort of like an in the moment, I needed to get it out. So it is how you want it to be. And too many times, like I would honestly suggest people to not have a steady Instagram when they first try to make their journal because there's too much expectation. You're like, oh, I wanna, and there's too much validation seeking from it, because she's like, well, if I'm not getting enough likes, then nobody likes my spread, and that means I don't want to do this again or whatever. Whereas it should really be for you first and foremost. It shouldn't be for anybody else's eyes. There's a lot of spreads in there that I'm very proud of, but that never go out on my Instagram because they're just too personal. I'm like, they're for me. This is my journal.
Well, that is actually all of the questions that I had. And this is like perfect timing too. But thank you so much for coming on, Catherine. This was such a great conversation.
No problem. I love talking to you. You know that. You're one of my favorite people to talk to, and I'm so proud of your podcast.
Thanks.